Tameko, 18 years here, and you took money from 25 residents out of the trust fund you managed.
I have managed this facility's patient accounts for 18 years, and I've always followed.
Tameko Green operated without meaningful oversight for 18 years as the financial officer of a Tuscaloosa nursing home. 25 elderly residents trusted her with their money. Not one person checked.
Promise for their day needs, and you skimmed it from the people who trusted you.
I am not going to discuss any resident counts without my attorney present right now.
She would not say another word in front of the cameras. Within 72 hours, she would walk into the Tuscaloosa County Jail on Highway 69, sign her own intake paperwork, and post a $5,000 bond. 18 years at the same nursing home. 25 elderly residents named in a single warrant. A patient trust fund that she alone controlled, allegedly skimmed across nearly 3 years. The dollar figure was small, the breach was intimate, and the question investigators kept asking was the one no one at the facility could answer. How did a Class B felony unfold inside a small business office for 32 months without a single coworker, family member, or auditor catching it? Before we get into this one, I want you to think about something. The people in this case were not strangers to the woman accused. They saw her every weekday. They greeted her by name. They handed her envelopes, signed her receipts, trusted her with the small amounts of money that made their daily lives possible. If you have ever had a loved one in long-term care, drop the facility's city in the comments. I want to see how many of you have been on the other side of an office like this one, and subscribe if you haven't yet. The cases we cover here rarely make the national news, and they should. Tameko Hadley Green was born in 1973 in the Alberta neighborhood of Tuscaloosa, Alabama, the second of 4 children raised by a steel mill machinist and a public school cafeteria manager. The Greens lived in a 1-story brick house off 25th Street, 2 blocks from a Baptist food pantry her mother helped run on Saturday mornings. Tameko's earliest jobs, by her own family's account, were not really jobs. They were tasks. Counting collection envelopes at the food pantry, sorting canned goods, walking elderly neighbors home with their grocery bags. Money, in the Green household, was something you handled carefully on behalf of someone else. She attended Central High School in the late 1980s, where teachers described her in yearbook captions as quiet, dependable, and good with numbers. She marched in the school band for 3 years, second-row clarinet, never first chair. Her mother kept every report card in a manila folder in the kitchen drawer. The grades were not extraordinary. The attendance was. Tameko missed school 4 times in 4 years, and 2 of those absences were funerals. After graduating in 1991, she enrolled at Shelton State Community College and worked weekend shifts at a Winn-Dixie on Skyland Boulevard. She earned an associate's degree in business administration in 1994, then a 1-year certificate in medical office management from the same school in 1996. She did not transfer to the University of Alabama, though it sat 15 minutes from her front door. By the time her younger brother enrolled at UA, Tameko was already working full-time and helping pay his tuition. Her first full-time office job was at a family medical practice on McFarland Boulevard, where she handled patient billing and insurance claims for 3 years. She left in 1999 to take a position as a billing clerk at a Druid City rehab clinic. She left that job in 2004 for a larger administrative role at a private home health agency. By 2007, she had 8 years of healthcare billing experience, a clean credit report, 3 letters of recommendation, and an interview scheduled at a 120-bed nursing and rehabilitation facility on the south side of Tuscaloosa. The hiring panel offered her the job the same afternoon. She started as an accounts receivable clerk in October 2007. Within 18 months, she was promoted to assistant business office manager. By 2013, she held the title of financial officer. Her annual performance reviews, obtained later by investigators, were consistent across more than a decade. Detail-oriented, trusted with sensitive resident accounts, highly responsive to family inquiries, reliable beyond expectation. One review from 2017 noted that she had personally driven a resident's monthly Social Security check to the bank during an ice storm because the regional office was closed. She was, by every available measure, the kind of employee facilities call indispensable. She trained 2 business office managers above her. She wrote the internal procedure manual for resident intake paperwork. She knew the names of the spouses, the grandchildren, the home addresses, the medication schedules. When a long-term resident died, she was usually the one who walked the family through, closing out the small accounts the facility had been managing on the resident's behalf. She married once briefly, in her late 20s. The marriage ended in 2003 without children, and she did not remarry. She lived with her mother on a quiet block in the Highlands neighborhood, drove a 2014 Toyota Camry she had paid off in 2019, and tithed regularly at a small church off University Boulevard. Co-workers described her as private, but warm. Family described her as the one everybody called when something went wrong. She was 52 years old when the investigators arrived. To understand what investigators say happened, you have to understand the Patient Trust Fund. It is one of the most overlooked pools of money in American long-term care. A nursing home patient trust fund is a single bank account maintained by the facility on behalf of the residents who live there. It exists for a simple reason. Many residents in long-term care, particularly those on Medicaid, are not permitted to hold more than $2,000 in personal assets without losing eligibility. But they still need money. Money for the hairdresser who comes on Wednesdays. Money for the snack cart that rolls down the hallway at 3 p.m. Money for the church donation when the chaplain visits. Money for a birthday card sent to a great-grandchild. Money for puzzle books. For the occasional Coca-Cola from the vending machine. For a magazine subscription that arrives every month in a thin paper sleeve. Family members deposit cash into the fund. Social Security checks are sometimes routed through it. The facility holds the money, the facility tracks it, and the facility's financial officer is, in nearly every case, the only person who touches it day to day. Federal law requires facilities to maintain these accounts in a separate bank account, to provide quarterly statements to residents and families, and to refund any remaining balance within 30 days of a resident's death or discharge. What federal law does not require is regular outside audits. There is no equivalent of a Medicare claims review for a trust fund. There is no automated red flag system. There is no inspector general who walks in unannounced to count the petty cash drawer. The Alabama Department of Public Health inspects nursing facilities on a roughly annual cycle. The trust fund is examined as part of that inspection, but the examination is narrow. A small, random sample. A check of recent statements. A spot reconciliation. It is not a forensic audit. It does not look back across years. It does not flag patterns. It looks at whether the basic structure is in place. If it is, the inspector moves on. The result is a category of money that is technically regulated but practically invisible. The amounts in any individual resident's account are small. The pooled balance across a 120-bed facility might sit at $20,000 or $30,000 on a given day. The transactions are tiny: $15 for a salon visit, $40 for a birthday party, $8 for a magazine subscription. The withdrawals look like exactly what they are: small slices of dignity in the last chapter of someone's life. Which is exactly what investigators say made this fund attractive to the person allegedly stealing from it. The money was small enough that no single missing dollar drew attention. The residents were old enough that most of them would not and could not audit their own statements. The families who might have noticed were often hundreds of miles away. And the one person inside the facility whose job it was to safeguard the fund was the same person whose signature was authorized to make every transaction. That structure, in this case, allegedly held for nearly 3 years. Investigators, when they finally reconstructed the activity, said the alleged scheme began quietly in January 2023. The pattern, as described in the Medicaid Fraud Control Unit's investigative summary, was not sophisticated. It did not require fake invoices, shell companies, or backdated ledgers. It did not require an accomplice. It required only the daily, unremarkable access of a financial officer to a checking account she had been responsible for since 2013. The first allegedly fraudulent transaction in the file was dated January 9, 2023, a Monday. A withdrawal of $42 was logged against the trust fund subaccount of a 91-year-old female resident on the long-term care wing. The withdrawal was documented as a salon expense. There was no corresponding receipt. The resident, according to nursing notes from that week, had not left her room. The on-site salon was closed that Monday. Investigators say withdrawals like this one continued, on average, 3 to 5 times per week, against a rotating set of residents. The amounts ranged from $12 to $187. The vast majority sat between 30 and 70. The documentation, when documentation existed at all, listed plausible categories: salon, vending, personal items, magazines, gift store. In a handful of cases, the documentation listed no category. It listed only a date, an amount, and the financial officer's initials. The residents whose accounts were named in the warrant shared certain characteristics. Investigators noticed the pattern early. 23 of the 25 had been diagnosed with some form of cognitive impairment, ranging from mild memory loss to advanced dementia. 18 of the 25 had no family member listed as an active financial monitor on their intake paperwork. 11 had no living spouse. 9 had no children. 4 had been residents of the facility for more than a decade. These were not random selections. These were the residents least equipped to question a missing $20 and least likely to have anyone outside the building doing the questioning for them. The amounts grew slightly over time, but never dramatically. Investigators say the alleged scheme never produced a single transaction large enough to trigger a standard banking alert. The largest single withdrawal in the entire investigative file was $187. There was no luxury car. There was no second house. There was no offshore account. The lifestyle of the accused remained, by all outward appearances, identical to the lifestyle she had maintained for the previous 2 decades. Co-workers, when later interviewed, said they had noticed nothing. The business office was small. 3 people worked in it on most days. The financial officer's door was usually open. She handed out birthday cards from the staff fund. She remembered every administrator's coffee order. She covered the front desk during lunch when the receptionist was at a doctor's appointment. Nothing about her demeanor changed across the period in question. Nothing about her wardrobe changed. Nothing about her car changed. What did change, slowly and invisibly, was the cumulative balance of 25 small accounts. The investigative summary calculated that, by September 2025, the total alleged shortfall across all 25 residents had reached at least $3,500. That figure is a floor, not a ceiling. Investigators have not ruled out additional accounts, additional time periods, or additional facilities. The number that appears in the charging document is the number the state can presently prove. $3,500 across 32 months, an average, when you do the math, of $109 per month, spread across 25 vulnerable adults against a fund nobody outside the building was watching. That is the entire alleged scheme. There is nothing else to it. The simplicity is, in many ways, the worst part. The case did not begin with a complaint from a resident. It did not begin with a worried family member. It did not begin with a co-worker walking into an administrator's office. It began with a piece of routine paperwork at the Alabama Department of Public Health. In the late summer of 2025, an analyst in the Bureau of Health Provider Standards in Montgomery was reviewing the trust fund documentation submitted by a Tuscaloosa nursing facility as part of its annual licensure renewal. The submission was, in form, complete. The numbers matched. The reconciliations balanced. The required quarterly statements had been generated on time. There was nothing immediately wrong with the file. But the analyst noticed something small. The pattern of withdrawals across a sample of resident accounts looked unusual. Not in the dollar amounts, in the cadence. A handful of long-term residents whose families had set up automatic deposit arrangements showed monthly outflows that consistently zeroed out the small deposits within 2 to 3 weeks. The residents, according to attached care notes, were largely bedbound. The outflows were categorized as personal item expenses. the analyst flagged the file for a second review. The second review reached the same conclusion. Something about the trust fund activity did not square with the residents' apparent daily lives. In October 2025, the Department of Public Health referred the matter to the Alabama Attorney General's Medicaid Fraud Control Unit. The unit, known internally as MFCU, is a small specialized prosecution and investigation team within the Attorney General's office. It exists specifically to handle cases of fraud, neglect, or abuse involving Medicaid-funded care. Nursing home trust funds, when they cross the unit's radar, almost always cross it because someone else flagged them first. MFCU investigators opened a formal case in late October 2025. They issued a subpoena for the facility's trust fund records dating back to January 2020. They issued a separate subpoena for the personal banking records of the facility's financial officer. They requested intake and admission paperwork for every current resident and every resident discharged or deceased within the prior 36 months. The records arrived in early November. The investigators began the work that would eventually produce the 25 names in the warrant. They built a spreadsheet of every withdrawal logged against a resident account during the period under review. They matched each withdrawal to a category. They matched each category to the resident's actual documented activity in the facility's nursing notes. They flagged every transaction where the documented category and the documented activity did not match. By mid-January 2026, the spreadsheet contained more than 400 flagged transactions across 25 residents. The financial officer was not, at that point, aware she was under investigation. She continued to come to work. She continued to process trust fund deposits and withdrawals. She continued to greet families in the lobby and hand out birthday cards from the staff fund. The Attorney General's office filed the warrant on February 19, 2026. The investigation that produced the warrant was not built on a single dramatic piece of evidence. It was built on the slow, methodical accumulation of paper. The financial records told the first part of the story. MFCU investigators reconciled the facility's trust fund bank statements against the resident-level subledger maintained inside the business office. The two should have matched. They mostly did. But across hundreds of transactions over 32 months, small discrepancies had accumulated. A withdrawal logged on the subledger that did not appear on the bank statement. A withdrawal on the bank statement that did not appear on the subledger. Cash withdrawals from the trust fund account that, on a corresponding day, were not distributed to any resident. The nursing notes told the second part of the story. Investigators pulled the daily charting on each of the 25 flagged residents and matched it against the trust fund activity. The mismatches were specific. A salon charge on a day the salon was closed. A vending charge against the account of a resident who had been hospitalized off-site for the entire week. A personal items charge dated on a Sunday, when the facility's gift store did not operate. None of these discrepancies, taken alone, would have been visible. Taken together, across hundreds of entries, they formed a pattern. The personal banking records told the third part of the story. Investigators reviewed cash deposits into the financial officer's personal checking account during the period under review. The deposits were not large. They were not flashy. They were small, consistent, and almost always within 48 hours of a corresponding cash withdrawal from the trust fund account. The dollar amounts did not match perfectly. They rarely do in cases like this, but the cadence aligned closely enough across enough months that investigators included the pattern in their charging affidavit. There was no smoking gun text message. There was no encrypted phone. There was no handwritten ledger of stolen amounts. The accused had not, by all appearances, anticipated being investigated. What there was, instead, was a paper trail of small inconsistencies in a system designed to assume good faith. The system had been built around the premise that the person handling the trust fund would be honest, because the fund was too small and too tedious to be worth stealing from. The premise, in the state's view, was wrong. 25 names. $3,500. 32 months of allegedly small, careful, almost invisible withdrawals from accounts that existed to fund the small dignities of elderly people who could no longer manage their own money. The Attorney General's office signed the warrant the next week. We are about to get into the surrender and the courthouse. Before we do, I want to acknowledge something. Cases like this almost never lead the local news. The dollar amount is too small. The victims are too quiet. There is no dramatic chase, no broken window, no body. But the breach is real, and the victims are real. And the only reason this one surfaced at all is that a single analyst in Montgomery happened to look closely at a routine file. If you appreciate this kind of coverage, subscribe. We do this every week. The stories that get buried are the ones that need the most light. She was not arrested at work. The Medicaid Fraud Control Unit, in cases involving white-collar defendants with no flight risk and no prior record, typically allows the accused to self-surrender. The arrangement is more orderly. It is also more documented. On the morning of February 23, 2026, Tameko Green drove herself to the Tuscaloosa County Jail on Highway 69. She arrived a few minutes before 9 a.m. She was accompanied by her attorney, a longtime Tuscaloosa defense lawyer who had taken the call from the family the night the warrant became public. She was wearing a navy cardigan, a cream blouse, dark slacks, and the same eyeglasses she had worn in her last employee badge photograph. She carried no purse. She carried no phone. She carried only a single folded copy of the warrant. Body cam footage from a sheriff's deputy at the intake desk captured the entire encounter. Deputy: "Ma'am, can you state your full name for the record?" Green: "Tameko Hadley Green." Deputy: "And your date of birth?" She gave the date in a flat, quiet voice. Deputy: "Are you here to surrender on the warrant signed February 19th of this year?" Green: "Yes, sir, I am." Deputy: "Do you understand the charge you're being booked on this morning?" Green: "First-degree theft of property." Deputy: "Have you spoken with your attorney about this booking?" Green: "I have." Deputy: "Is there anything you'd like to say on the record before we proceed?" She paused. Her attorney shifted beside her. She looked at the deputy. She did not look at the camera. Green: "Not at this time." The deputy nodded once and continued the booking. She was fingerprinted. She was photographed. She signed the intake paperwork in a careful, steady cursive that had not changed measurably across 30 years of employment files. She was processed for a $5,000 bond, which her family posted before noon. She walked out of the jail by 12:30. She has not, as of this recording, made any public statement. She has, through her attorney, entered a not guilty plea. She is presumed innocent. The case is pretrial. First-degree theft of property in Alabama is a Class B felony. The statutory range, set in Alabama Code Section 13A 5 or 6, runs from 2 years to 20 years in state prison. The maximum fine is $30,000. A conviction would require restitution to the named victims, would almost certainly result in the permanent loss of her professional standing in healthcare administration, and would likely bar her from any future employment involving fiduciary access in a long-term care setting. These outcomes are conditional. She has been charged, she has not been convicted. Alabama prosecutors carry the burden, and her attorney has indicated publicly that the defense will challenge the categorization of certain transactions, the accuracy of the subledger reconciliation, and the chain of custody on the personal banking records. The case will move slowly. Cases like this almost always do, but the consequences that do not require a conviction have already arrived. The facility terminated her employment within 48 hours of the warrant becoming public. The Alabama Department of Public Health opened a separate administrative review of the facility's trust fund procedures, which is ongoing. 3 of the 25 named residents have died since the warrant was signed, of causes unrelated to the case, and their estates will be represented in any restitution, proceeding by court-appointed counsel. 2 families of named residents have filed civil notices of intent to sue the facility itself, on the theory that the facility's oversight of the trust fund was negligent regardless of the individual conduct alleged against the financial officer. The facility has, in a written statement, cooperated fully with the investigation. It has installed dual signature requirements for all trust fund withdrawals above $25. It has contracted an outside accounting firm to conduct quarterly audits of the fund going forward. It has notified every current resident's family of the allegations and provided a contact at the Attorney General's office for any concerns. None of these measures existed before February 2026. The broader picture is harder to act on. There is no federal mandate to audit nursing home trust funds. Alabama is not unusual in this respect. Most states leave the oversight to the facility itself, on the assumption that the facility's financial officer is honest and that the state's annual inspection is sufficient. The case in Tuscaloosa is one of the quiet exceptions that occasionally surfaces and briefly forces the question. Most of the time, the question is not asked. 25 residents, $3,500, 32 months, an 18-year employee charged with allegedly skimming the smallest, most personal pool of money in the building from the people least able to defend it. A regulator in Montgomery who happened to look. A defense attorney filing motions. A pre-trial calendar in Tuscaloosa County that will not move quickly. She is presumed innocent. The trial date has not been set. The facility is still operating. The trust fund is still funded. And somewhere on the long-term care wing, a resident is asking the new business office manager if there is enough left in her account this month for a magazine subscription, and a haircut, and a card for her great-granddaughter's birthday. That is the system this case lives inside. Whether the system changes will depend on whether anyone outside Tuscaloosa is still watching after the verdict. This case was quiet, but the case on the right-hand side of your screen is louder, uglier, and impossible to look away from. Click it now.